Hey, one more thing before you go. What do you do when you have a life changing event at 19 years old? How do you learn to live and love differently after a near death experience? How do you align your soul, spirit, mind, and body after understanding that life can change in an instant? Stay tuned. We're going to answer these questions and more when we talk to a woman whose life was changed dramatically after her transformative near death experience. I'm your host, Michael Hurst. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. My guest in this episode had a life-changing experience when she was a 19-year-old cadet at the United States Air Force Academy. Nicole Kerr will be forced to learn to live and love differently following a terrifying and transformational near-death experience. Her memory of the crash came back 20 years later, and it's taken Nicole almost another 2 decades to align her soul, her spirit, her mind, and her body, proving healing is certainly a non-linear process. She's an award-winning health expert and co-author of Eating the Rainbow, Lifelong Nutrition Wellness Without Lies, Hype, or Calculus. She's appeared on CNN, PBS, CBS, ABC. That's a tongue twister. The Food Channel and a host of other TV and radio shows to share her unique perspective on wellness, lifestyle, and nutrition. She's also the author of You Are Deathless, a near-death experience, and taught me how to fully live and not fear death. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Michael. I am delighted to be here with you, and I look forward to today's discussion.
I'm ecstatic that you're here. I think that you have an amazing journey. And as we talked about before we started, it's unique because everything that you're going to talk about, or most everything you're going to talk about, I know where those locations are. I know where you went to school. I know where you had your accident.
I feel like I should be saluting you, sir.
Well, I was only a sergeant, so, sergeants don't get saluted. I like to unfold people's lives as we start. I know it's a tremendous story to tell about your life journey because you had such an amazing journey of where you came from and where you're at today. And I think that what we have to share with you, the listener, and the viewer, you're going to find that this is an opportunity for you to really, really understand that although life can change in an instant, we can always make a positive out of it, number one. And that, number two, when you thought nothing else existed on the other side, think again.
Absolutely. Well, I guess I'll just kind of say I finally have come full circle in my life. I was born at Camp Lejeune here in North Carolina, and that's about 33 miles away in Jacksonville. And my dad was a Marine. He did go to the U.S. Air Force Academy. He was in the second class that graduated, and then he cross-commissioned into the Marine Corps. And then they moved around a little bit and then wound up in Mississippi. So all my formative years were spent in Jackson, Mississippi. Mississippi is, in case you haven't been there, it is the deep South, and it is also known as the Bible Belt. So I grew up in a extremely religious environment, not only with my family, but the area as well. I got a double dose of it because my dad was Southern Baptist and my mother was Lutheran. So the way they did it is we went to the Lutheran church in the morning, and then we went to the Baptist church at night. Then went to the Baptist church on Wednesday night. So we spent a lot of time in church. Oh, and you can't forget the revivals, okay? That's where you had to pack the pew. Well, with 6 people in our family, we could pack a pew just with our family. But a lot of religion growing up, and needless to say, when we got older, we could decide which church we wanted to go to. I will give the Baptist a lot of credit. At least they have more fun. They have a gym, a bowling alley, a lot of recreational type activities, softball teams, whereas the Lutheran church, not so much. But
I'll have to remember that.
And they're two, the thing is they both talk about God and it's supposed to be the same God, but they have different rules in order to follow to get to God. So as a child, it's really confusing on this church is saying this and
Yep.
this church is saying that. So it's really, you know, you're very steeped in religion there, just like you're steeped in sweet tea and fried foods and that kind of culture, putting bacon fat and everything.
Wow.
It's has a as a dietitian, I can tell you, it's one of the worst areas in our country for chronic diseases because they eat so unhealthy. Sorry, Mississippi, but you do.
You know,
And it's one.
my grandmother, my grandparents, on my mother's side, Mississippi. So I understand that, and she learned to cook from her mother, of course, and it was talking about pork chops in a half inch of grease, and then
Yeah.
take that grease and make gravy and smother the gravy and butter on top of the potatoes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
They're also in the stroke and heart attack belt as well. So
Wow.
anyhow, and unfortunately, a lot of poverty as well. Mississippi is, I think, the most impoverished state in the United States. So it's I came from middle to upper class family, and my dad had his own company called Yazoo. We spent weekends working at the company. It was a lawnmower company, and so we grew up basically not having a whole lot of fun, or we had to work really hard in order to get a reward, like to go even swimming. You had to get your chores done. He ran us like, do you remember the movie The Great Santini?
I do.
That's kind of the way we were brought up. Dad had his own commandments, plus we had the 10 commandments. And in our eyes growing up, I have three other siblings, our father was God. So you had to please him in order to get to God in heaven.
Plus, he was a
So,
Marine, which
yes,
doubled that.
yeah. God bless the Marines, but they're black and they're white.
Yep.
There's no gray in between. The military just drills that out of you. So we grew up private school until I was in the eighth grade. And then my mother had this brilliant idea that they were paying taxes and we were going to go to public schools. So I was one of two buses that was bused into an all black area with a school that was 98% African American. You can't imagine why I was just like, what has happened to me?
Yeah, especially in
But
Mississippi.
yeah, so that was a life changing experience right around eighth grade. That was when I would say is defining. My dad's rules didn't allow for dating, so I never learned that whole piece on how to date. And then when it came time, I put myself back in a private school halfway through my junior year. My parents went on a trip and they came back, and I said, Mom, I pulled out of the public school. I'm back in a private school. And I said, for the next year and a half, that's what I want to do to graduate. And that was hard because they all made their friends in the
Right.
seventh grade when they started going to school together. The homecoming queen, we knew who she was going to be in the seventh grade, that whole type of thing. But I went there, and then uh, I never even thought I was modeling. I was head of a teen board. 17 magazine. I was their rep from Mississippi,
Wow.
and I never thought about the military. I didn't like planes necessarily. I like they got me from one place to another, but I didn't have this passion for anything military related. So my dad was like, one of you kids need to follow in my footsteps. And I knew my older sister wouldn't. And my two younger brothers wouldn't either because they didn't have the grades or the eyesight. So I was going to step up and be daddy's girl. And this is where the identity of people pleasing killed me. And it will kill you if that is one of the identities that you have in your world, because at the end of the day, if you're always trying to please somebody else, you're going to feel like a roach that got stomped on and squished. You're not going to get anything out of that. And that is really hard for people growing up in the South because we're taught to please people, especially women. We were going to school back then, most girls to get their MRS degree, and that sweet kind of fluffy talk that the South is known for, but it's not, it's not your truth. And you're taught not to hurt your mother. That's like the fourth commandment is it's, about honoring your parents, but they need to put in there, you don't even hurt them, or talk back to them or anything like that, so you get really conditioned into this way of being and having, any feelings that you have that disagree with the way your parents think, to push it down. And I got to tell you this, Michael, because it's the truth. I got into emotional work later in my career. We are a very illiterate society when it comes to emotions. We grow up with pretty much four: bad, sad, mad, and glad.
I can agree with that.
And then there's this whole buffet that we don't know. And so we just push them all down. So that is an issue when you're aligning your mind, body, and soul and spirit. You've got to be able to embody emotions. That means they have to get from your neck into the rest of your body instead of thinking of it and intellectualizing the emotion. So I have helped, and there are all kinds of technique out there that help people do this. The one that I was doing was neuro-emotional technique, but there's EMDR, there's tapping, there's biofeedback, there's all kinds of things out there now because people are realizing the importance of you're operating on an unconscious level. You're just playing out. We only operate with about 5% consciousness. So all that to say, I was going to please my father, so I applied to the academy. I don't know if people understand how arduous it is to get into these academies. You have to have a congressional nomination. You have to pass, of course, medical, physical, academia standards. It's, they only can nominate so many people from their state. So they're going to go with the best. Well, they started allowing women into these military academies. The first class of women graduated 80. Mine was 86. So you can see I was one of the first groups that went through. And I can just tell you, there was a lot of abuse that went on. And when I got told I got accepted, the principal called me in his office and, said, you have a phone call from Congressman Dowdy from Washington. I was like, uh-oh. And he said, congratulations, Nicole, you're accepted to the academy. And I just sank in that chair and tried to act happy. But I'm like, what the hell have I done, to myself, because now I had to go. I didn't have an option out. And off I went. And let me tell you, 3 weeks into basic training, we got one phone call, and that was home, and it was 3 minutes, and they timed it. And I heard my mother's voice, and I cried and cried and cried for 3 minutes straight. I didn't even say another word. I just heard her voice and cried. Then they cut me off the line, and the commander says, you go sit over there in a cur and get yourself together. And I didn't realize till years and years later that that was my first panic attack. That's exactly what that was. And I wanted my mother to tell me I had permission to come home, that her and dad were like, we agree, if this isn't what you want, if things aren't going well, you have permission to quit. You're not going to be shamed. You're not going to be considered a failure or any of that. We love you regardless. Come on home. And I never got that. Instead, years later, my mother tells me, I said to your father, oh my gosh, what have we done to her? And he said, oh, she'll be fine. And I was not fine. Actually, I had to go to remedial training, which was even worse. So I knew then that my soul was in the wrong place. My soul was not designed to kill people. And actually, when you look at the underlying reason we have a military, it's to protect and defend the United States of America. And that involves training with killing people, because that's what we would do, is go to war and you're risking your life. So we were learning techniques, whether it was firing weapons by arm-to-arm combat, whatever it was that you would, bayonets, working with bayonets to kill somebody. And that's not me. I have not a bone in my body that wants to kill another person, more or less an animal or even insects, but I will kill a roach. I will have to tell you that. I can't handle, especially the ones that fly. I don't know if you've had
Yeah.
those, but in Mississippi, they're like B-52s, I think is what we called them. But the roaches, I'm sorry, I do kill those. But
That's okay. We'll
it
forgive
was
you.
not for me. And I tried to keep pushing myself and pushing myself. And my stress got worse and worse and worse. I was making it through it. I don't know how, by the grace of God. Um, and then during Hell Week, I thought for sure I was going to get kicked out because I couldn't make it through that. Somehow I did, manage survival. And then my sophomore year, instead of ponying up and saying, I don't want to do this anymore, I don't want to go back, I showed up and the academics were getting much harder. My brain, Michael, does not think engineering. It thinks more like anatomy, physiology. I can picture where bones and things like
Right.
that go. But the dynamics of physics and uh, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, I'm not that. And that's what I was getting into. So I was getting in over my head. And it was really starting to scare me that I would fail out, you
Right.
know? And so then a Sunday at the beginning of the school year, August 28th, we all got together as a squadron. I arrived late because I was at the commandant's house trying to convince women to come to the academy of all things. Okay, high schoolers saying, come on, you know. But needless to say, I got there late and I was the last to leave. I asked one of the seniors because we can't have cars until we're juniors or seniors. I didn't know him hardly at all. I asked him for a ride back and he said, sure. And then he wanted to stop at a bar and have two more beers. And then he wanted to stop and watch the sunset. And I was hyper vigilant about the time because if we're not back by 7:35, we get demerits. And I didn't want to start the school year off. And I was so freaking naive, Michael. I didn't know that he had a whole plan of, okay, let's get some liquor into her. Let's go have the sunset. Let's fool around. That sex was on his mind the whole time, you know? And when we got back on the road, the last thing I remember was actually when my memory did come back, which was 19, almost 20 years later, I went to my chiropractor instead of going to work at CDC. And I wanted to share how I wrote it in the book because I think that really does make a difference in terms of describing. Let me find it here.
And the accident happened August 20th, 1983. Right.
Right. So that means 20 years later, you know, here it came. Okay, and I have this marked. Um, oh my goodness. Okay, can we stop here just a minute?
We can.
Okay, let me find it. I had it marked.
We're good.
I just wanted to read you out of the book that I wrote, You Are Deathless. When my memory came back, what I remember. I had gone to my chiropractor, so Dr. West shifts his hand to a new set of acupressure points as I hear a sigh leave my body. I'm spinning around insanely fast, like those tilt-a-whirl carnival rides, grabbing the side of the car door. I scream as my side of the car smashes head on into something. What is it? I realize I can't stop anything and my voice fades. I fly out of my seat through the windshield. Around me, glass is shattering like splatter paint. I feel pieces of it cutting into my thighs and legs. God, this hurts. And then something slices my left foot. Bad. I try to shield my face with my hand, my mouth wide open under it. Then I'm in the air for what feels like forever. When I finally hit the ground, I understand that I am going to die. My mind freezes. I scream, oh my God, help me. Then I have one final thought. I'm not going to make it. And that was it. That was the end of the treatment with him. And the truth was, I didn't make it. And that memory came up along with the rest of the next day, the rest of the memory of crossing over to the other side, my conversation on the other side, and what my life purpose is. So at the scene of the wreck, it was in Monument, Colorado. What I later learned from the paramedic who came to visit me 10 weeks into it, he came to my hospital room. I put all this together through hospital notes, through police reports, through district attorney reports, through all of that I had kept over the years. And so I now know the way the guy was driving the car. And my memory came back that he was trying to make a sexual pass at me. And I said no, and he turned the wheel and the Corvette spun out. The back end of it hit a boulder, moved the boulder, flipped the car, and we were both thrown out, where I was pronounced dead. There was a group of bystanders that were in a house. They heard it, came out, covered me up with a blanket, and then it was a matter of waiting 10 to 15 minutes for the first responders to get there. And one of the EMTs took a look at me, and the only sign of life he could get out of me was my right pupil dilating. And what do we say, Michael, about the eyes from a spiritual context?
Well, our soul,
Yeah,
it's a window
the
to our
windows to
soul.
the soul. So I now know that that eye was the only sign of life. I had a blood pressure of 60 over zero, so you can see why they thought I was
Thought you were
dead.
dead, yeah.
But that's the soul coming back into me when he saw that. Now, my soul left me when I went up and I looked down and I realized I was going to die from that reading that I just gave
Right.
you. So my soul flew out, and this Casper the Being kind of figure, an angel who I now know was my grandfather, Kerr, he lifted me up, and we went up to this I don't know, dimension, I guess you could call it. And I could see myself dead in the ditch there. And I don't remember any of those feelings in terms of the pain because I never crashed. My soul was already out of my body. Does that make sense?
It does. I've heard that before where somebody said that they were taken from their body right directly prior to a traumatic incident like that, so that the person actually couldn't feel it.
That's exactly what happened to me because I didn't want to feel that I had amputated my left foot. I had broken my pelvis on both sides. I had severed my right wrist. I had a fourth degree laceration in between my anal and sphincter muscle. I cut a huge hole of skin. It just all went out on my right thigh. They had to skin graft that together. And then a huge road burn from sliding on the pavement, skidding along it. It just took off a couple of layers of skin there. So, it was very obvious that, to people looking at me that I wasn't breathing. I had no vitals that they could get. And if it hadn't been for that paramedic, John Hartling taking a second look at me, and he's a very old school Navy guy, SEAL, and he was just like, I don't take anybody's word that somebody's dead. I look at them myself and I make that proclamation. And thank God he was like that
Yeah.
because I would have for sure stayed dead. So,
Yep.
the story on the other side and the message I got. Do you want me to go ahead and share that now?
Absolutely. I think that first and foremost, I need to commend that individual for doing that because there are times that, as a first responder, we've come upon somebody that appeared to be dead and, by all intensive purposes, sounded dead,
Mhm.
and we didn't give up. And the ones that we didn't give up on came back. Now, there were a few that obviously we lost, but the uniqueness of that individual to take the time to say, it's not done till I say it's done,
Yeah.
has put you here. So thank
Yeah.
you,
And he,
universe.
yes, I call him one of my angels. I have a chapter in the book called Calling All Angels. And my medical team
Hmm.
was divinely guided to me because they were all what I would call quirky kind of people,
Right.
but mavericks in their own way. And he had to get a IV started in my neck. That's not easy to
It's
do.
not easy to do.
Most EMTs do not have to train
No.
to be able to do that. Then they had just gotten these thing called masked pants, where you put the
Yeah.
pants on the victim and it pushes all the blood up to your
Your
organs,
heart. Yeah.
to get it up to your heart
In your lungs.
because yeah. And so and I was doing something called, do you know this term bleeding from the bones?
I do.
Okay, that's what he couldn't understand, is that why there wasn't more blood uh, on the scene, because I was just so, like, you would have thought there would have been more, but he said no, you were bleeding from the bones. That's why.
Yeah, I read that. I
So
read that in your book. It was. I found that interesting as well because, especially, I mean, the crash itself, as a traffic investigator, that's investigated hundreds, if not at least 1,000 accidents or more. You know, that in itself, that crash, that when you look at the car and you look at what's left of that car, it's hardly recognizable, number one. And theoretically, as a professional, and I say professional because I was a legitimate trained traffic accident investigator, you wouldn't recognize the car.
yeah,
As a car, you kind of go, wow, that's, I mean, you really, really were given another opportunity. And, you know, to be here to have this conversation in regard to that. So,
there's the car.
yeah, that is, you would think anybody whatsoever would have survived that. Now, it was a
Yeah, that looks.
convertible,
Yeah,
but at the speeds that they anticipated that vehicle to be, and the way that it hit and the way that it rolled, you know, I don't know very many people who have survived that, something like that, even similar to that.
yeah, and I will say, people always ask me, what about the driver? And I said he survived, but his blood alcohol was double the limit.
That's why he
And
survived.
yeah, it's exactly right.
Trust me,
So,
as a DUI cop, that irritates me to no end.
yeah, well, there you go. So back to 19 years later, my message when that, actually my grandfather came in an angel form because he knew I would recognize an angel growing up, because the concept of God that I had at 19 was one that God was dual, had a duality. He was loving and kind and protective on one side, but if you disobeyed God, then the wrath of God would come upon you. God was punitive and judgmental. So I did know about angels. I knew about the archangels from the Bible. So I believed in angels. And that is why I believe he came in that form. So I just went, and it was like I'd always remembered from day one, white, bright lights. That is the only thing for 19 years that I remembered about the wreck. And I asked my surgeon, I said, could that have been me seeing like the hospital operating room lights? She goes, no way, Nicole, you were unconscious when they brought you in and were for a while. She said, that I believe is what you're recalling as part of your NDE phenomenon. She said, we almost lost you a couple of times, but you've been clear since the beginning that you just remembered these bright white lights. And Raymond Moody, who is kind of he coined the term near death experience, he said that that is the most common trait of near death experiencers, is that bright white clear light. And it's not blinding. It's not like headlights where you, or a camera flash where you get blinded by it. You can see through it. And I think, this is me, when you think about colors, okay, the color white absorbs every other color, right?
Correct.
So when you're in this white tunnel or white light, you feel like an astronaut floating in space. You feel like you're in this cocoon. You have left behind all these identities, all these mistakes, everything human. You've even left behind your name. You're not even Nicole anymore. And you just feel so loved and so blissed out. I mean, it's really even hard to come up with words that describe it. But when I get to this place on the other side, I noticed some other voices, and I'm not in a human form, but I'm understanding them. And what they are talking about is that we need to ask for help on this realm, and meaning the earth realm. And that is asking the angels to intercede to help us with whatever we need help with. And because we have free will, they're not just going to pop in and say, okay, I'm here to help you. You have to specifically ask for help, unless it's a unavoidable emergency like mine was. So That's the only time they'll just come in and help you. So please hear that message, everyone. You have a whole angelic realm. You have your own guardian angels. They are all here waiting for you to ask for help in whatever it is. Don't get attached to the outcome of what it looks like. That's where we can kind of go sideways a lot. We think it needs to look like a certain way. And I've learned over the years to not pray for something specific, like heal so and so from cancer. My prayer is now to I pray for the highest and greatest good for all, because I don't know what is for the highest and greatest good of that person and their family. So that's how I have switched my prayers, instead of saying, please, automatically just, have a miraculous healing in this. And sometimes, that does happen, but it's in for people praying for other people. I suggest that you pray in a more uh, what do I say, general way for everyone's highest and greatest good, and that will be revealed. But it may not be what you think.
That's what we make a habit of talking to our angels. I talk to my angels every day, actually. It's kind of one of those things where they're probably going, "You again? Who wants to
No, they're
take
here to help us. There's
Who wants to
thousands
take
of
this
them.
one this time?"
Yeah.
It's like going into the restaurant and the waitress goes, "Oh crap, it's that guy," and they're going, "Hey, come here, take my table, will you?" um, we usually kind of ask from that perspective, and I can validate that. I myself, like I said, I talk to them on a consistent basis every day. We talk to the archangels, we talk to our angels, and we ask them to bless the house and to bless us in it, and we've done the same thing. And whatever's the greatest good, I agree with that. We say this or something better. This or
Yes.
something better is the way we kind of phrase it. Not specifically like you had just done, but this or something better for that person or for whatever we're asking for. And they've always answered. They've never failed.
Yeah. And they
Oh,
won't.
yeah, I've always been there. They've always been there every time. Each one of my operations I went into, same thing. Before I went in, we talked to the angels, and when I came out, we thanked them and said we were grateful. So it's kind of one of those things that they're there for us. We just have to
Yeah. But
ask.
yes. And there's the other thing is thank them.
Oh, be
You
grateful.
know.
Exactly. You have to be
Yes.
grateful.
Yes. Yes.
Have to be grateful for what you have in your life and who are there, and including the angels that are over your shoulder and push you in the right direction or whisper in your ear,
Absolutely.
don't turn
They work
left, turn
hard.
right.
They work hard for a lot of us, especially if we're really stubborn.
Oh,
So I
you've
was
been
like,
talking to my
"Ooh,
angels,
how many
haven't you?
times do I need to learn that lesson about men or whatever it is?" But
You've been
the
talking to
other
my
message
angels.
I received, so I want people to be real, real like, you got that one, okay? Ask for help from the angels. They are there, okay? Michael even confirms that. The
Exactly.
next the next one I was told was not to fear death, and that was going to be my mission. And I was like, what? That is like huge, broad, not to fear death, not to fear dying. And I'm like, uh-oh. Then it dawns on me, I'm going to go back into that body that I can see, and it's teal colored striped Azad shirt and khaki shorts, and the foot is off but barely, just laying right there. And I just am like, I don't want to go back. I really don't. I was like, no, please, not me. And unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, now I'm fortunate
I
that
was
I
about to
did
say,
come back.
fortunately, because we're having this conversation, see?
But yeah, but I tried a couple more times to go back. I had a code blue in one of my operations where they actually called the time, said I was dead. Went out and told my parents to start funeral arrangements, and Dad's like, "Well, do we have her buried at the academy?" Or my mother's like, "I'm not believing she's dead." And sure enough, then the surgical nurse comes in. Another 2 minutes later, they got her going again. I had my lungs fill up with fluid. They could not get them to stop filling up with
Whoa.
fluid. And, I was just like, my, I have a military angel as well that stands and protects me, and his name is James. And it's just like he worked really hard, really, really hard to keep me here. So I had a couple of more, and my doctor confirmed it. She said, you had a couple of more near death experiences, Nicole, when you were in the hospital. So that message has taken me another 20 years to figure out because I had to start at, okay, I'm physically healing, but then there's the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And my parents, as religious as they are, when the doctor said Nicole's going to need mental health help to deal with this trauma, they said, God and Jesus are our psychologist and psychiatrist, and she'll be fine. And that was not true either. I was not fine. Uh, Less than a year later, I went to live with my sister in Dallas, and I developed an eating disorder. Compulsive eating, as it was known back then. Today it would be binge eating or binge eating purge. But I was stuffing down the pain, and it was something I lived with for almost 20 years till I got married. It was so embarrassing. I
Mm.
never wanted to admit it. I struggled to put it in the book because people looking at me thinking I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, I look great, and then they're like, "You binged?" And I was like, "Yeah," because I was in so much pain, but I didn't know it then. They didn't know a
Mm.
lot about eating disorders and why, you thought I went into nutrition thinking I was going to cure myself if I could just figure out what to eat, and it wasn't about that at all.
Well, in reality, I mean, you were having PTSD from the incident, and I think that we have come. I say we as society. I've known this for a long time, being in my old profession, but we as society have just come to the conclusion. Finally, we're starting to realize that post-traumatic stress disorder comes from any traumatic incident within our life that has a negative impact on our life in one form or another, or inhibits or puts an obstacle in front of our life and doesn't allow us to move forward. That's post-traumatic stress disorder, and it can happen with your accident. It can happen with your accident, very much so. And I think we finally, society's finally starting to recognize that. Same thing with sexual assault victims, rape victims, kidnap victims, as well as traumatic accidents like what you went through. It is unfortunate that it hadn't been noticed or understood earlier, but I think now that it's finally being accepted in the mainstream, that it's not shell shock, what used to be called shell shock, only soldiers got it. They're finding out we as human beings get it.
Absolutely. And I would also venture to say from this pandemic that we have been in, and who knows the uncertainty of where things are
Yeah.
going, that we are dealing with a world that is PTSD, a lot of trauma, a lot of anxiety, and a
Yeah.
lot of depression. And it is really taking a toll on people's nervous systems, staying in this fight, flight, or freeze instead of being able to get into a
Yeah.
parasympathetic state and allow yourself to rest and digest. And I want everyone to know this accident next year will be 40 years. I was only diagnosed with PTSD by the Veterans Administration 3 years ago. That's
That's
how long they had
wow.
missed it. They told me I had migraines. They treated migraines. They treated anxiety. They treated depression. And I never got better. Those meds did not work because PTSD has a different medication or
Yeah.
different dosing, and it's a whole different realm in the medication realm to deal with if that's the route you go. Get help with it if you have it, because let me tell you, there's nothing worse than walking around this planet fearing everything, and that's what we're getting into with my book, is the fear of death. And that is what, ironically, I was told I had the message that I was to bring back to people, but I was fearing it myself until recently,
Until that.
where I was able to recognize, oh my God, that has been the trigger, is I have needed to control things. And that goes back to the eating disorder.
Right.
That is, in things in your life are out of control. So what you can control is the food, and it affects everyone in the family. Don't, and it's not a willpower issue. My Marine dad just told me to eat less pizza. And I'm like, you don't understand.
Yeah.
That's not it, you know?
And that's that generation also.
Yeah.
That generation is, just do it.
Willpower.
Exactly. Just push through it, do it. do it now. There's
Yeah,
no
that's right. It's like, that's not working too well for me, Dad. Um,
exactly. It's it is
they couldn't understand it, and so that is why I spend a good chunk of the book um, in here talking about trauma and repressed memories. Because when I went to the chiropractor, he told me what was happening was I was having repressed memories that were now surfacing. And the body keeps a score. That's a great book if you haven't looked at it about trauma, but it will keep a record of it. And in my opinion, if it's for your higher or greater good or that of others, that trauma will come out
right.
and be of service in a way that you may not ever think it could be. But because some people say, Nicole, I just don't remember. It happened so long ago. And I said, well, do the work on your body, connecting your emotions to your body, do the soul work, do the other work. And if ask your guides and angels, if it's meant to be for you to know, then they will allow that to come through. But sometimes it doesn't need to come through because it's not going to be of service. It's only going to make things much, much worse.
Yeah, it is. I think that the the fact that you went to a chiropractor, right, and that
Hmm.
in the middle of that session, that's when your memory started coming back in regard to
Yeah.
the accident and everything else, which obviously opened up the opportunity for you to have a better understanding of your PTSD. You yourself knew that you were probably experiencing that, correct?
Yeah, it
Before you
actually
were
started
diagnosed.
when I was going to work and I did my normal routine. I go to Starbucks and get my coffee, and then I was going to the CDC in Atlanta where I was working. And I sat there and I had at the light and I had a memory of exactly how I sat in the car. I mean, it was
It
clear
just
as day.
popped up.
And so then I went on to the chiropractor and said, I'm going to sit in your waiting room until you have an opening because
Oh,
I am shaking here. And he said, okay, they're repressed memories. You're okay. This is just your body reliving it. And you have
going
been
from
through
there.
it, but we'll help guide you through it.
That's amazing. It's a good thing that he did that. I mean, that's very helpful.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Um,
saying. The people have been the ones that have come to my aid and help have had the right skill set and tools to be able to work, through me. Now, I've been misdiagnosed a couple of times.
right,
It's there's a blend of Eastern and there's a blend of Western. There's a holistic pattern to this, but you have to address when you look at the circle of a wellness wheel. If you take the very basics and divide it into quarters, you have physical, you have mental, you have emotional, and you have spiritual. You have to address all of those to truly be in alignment with who you are. And I think I started in the physical realm as a dietitian, thinking, okay, I'll tell people what to eat. And then I recognized when people got stressed out, and even during this pandemic,
right.
they go to comfort foods. They eat the entire pint Ben and Jerry's, and they want the whole pizza. They want their comfort foods.
Yep.
Well, that's okay. That dopamine hit for a little while, but when something goes on for 2.5, 3 years, 4 years, you can't keep that
Can't do
up,
that
and your
anymore.
body is going to be in a state of just massive inflammation, and you're going to feel yucky. So you got to deal with diet, you got to
Right.
deal with exercise and sleep, but then you have to deal with the mental, and that's what we're seeing. I'm seeing it with all this mass murders that are going on in these 15-year-old kids, are these kids that are just not getting the mental health they're needing,
Yep.
access to firearms, and just killing people at random. It's just insane that we don't have stronger mental health program. That
I
just
agree.
not we That's adding to our fears, which we don't need. We need to have them calm down. And because when you're in fear, you can't get clarity, and in making any decision you need clarity.
I agree with
And
that
so then
100.
I went to emotional, which I trained in NET to get at the subconscious of where is that trigger coming from? What age were you when it happened that you weren't able to process? And so when it happens again or something similar, your brain goes back to that
Right.
age and relives that age. So you're acting it out as a 6-year-old would, or a 20-year-old, and it can be something as simple as your first date commented on your body when you had sex, something negative. And
Right.
so you didn't tell that person how you really felt about that comment. You just let it
It gets
go.
pushed
And
down.
and then every guy you've been with since, you're wondering if that's what they're thinking. And then, you'll probably attract someone who will do the same thing and say the same thing or something similar.
Right.
And then you get into that stressed state and you're going, oh my gosh. And you don't realize it's unconscious, but it's running your whole energy system. And
Yeah,
now
that's
I'm in spiritual, which is truly my vocation. The rest of them were occupations, and it took me this long,
it's trying
40
to figure
years.
that out.
Yeah, I said 40 years. I feel like the Israelites where the desert, or
Wandering
where
the
they were
desert.
wandering around or whatever for 40 years. I'm like, now I
Uh,
realize on the other side there's no linear timeline, but I'm like, oh my gosh, God, can you speed it up on
yeah,
the Earth timeline
tighten
for
the
me? Because
timeline here just a little bit.
that's been my whole adulthood.
Oh, that's crazy. Can you hang on one second? I have to
Yeah.
pause. My dog is running back and forth between here and the door.
Okay, go
I'll be
get
right.
that.
So when you were on the other side, you heard these other voices, and from what you remember, they give you this new purpose in your life, this new opportunity for you to help others understand is that we shouldn't fear death. I mean, was it like a verbal conversation? How did that take place?
I heard it, so it was somehow the transmission in this spirit form, this, vapor kind of form of, it was in a way that I could hear it. And that's how I process things, from an auditory perspective with my angels, with my guides. Some people are clairvoyant, some people are clairsentient, but I clearly heard that message. And I was like, but when I went back into my body and woke up in the ICU, I had no memory of it except the bright white lights. So it was completely wiped because I had to go back to basically being an infant. Okay. I couldn't walk on my own. I couldn't go to the bathroom. I was totally dependent on the hospital for 4 months and then another 8 months with my mother. Okay. So she became my best friend. We got codependent, and my dad was like, okay, I got to break this up. So he sent me to live with my sister, who wasn't getting a sister. She was getting somebody who still needed help, an invalid, and which, it was a real strain on her, because that's when I went into my eating disorder. She didn't know what was going on. She just knew that I was not happy and that food was disappearing. And, she was out dating, she was having the fun scene, and I was home alone, just, you know, in pain and feeling like nobody would ever desire me, no guy would ever desire me, because I had all these scars. I had a colostomy that later was reversed, but it's all this low self-esteem that has taken me years to work through and to find my path to these different healers and different modalities to help me heal. And then I had to work through the whole concept of God, because the God that I experienced on the other side was not the God that I was raised with. And so how do you make sense of that? And I call it the vending machine concept of God, because I was raised where you put in the behavior that you want. I mean, like a Coke machine, you put it in, you punch the button. I'm going to have a Coca-Cola. Here's the money. Here's the right behavior. And then a Coca-Cola should come out, right? If you do that. Well, what if it doesn't? What if a Mountain Dew comes out? And then you go, uh-oh, I must have done something wrong. And then what if nothing comes out of the machine? It's stuck. And then you think, okay, what did I do wrong? It's never the vending machine's fault. It's your fault. And it's kind of like that's how I saw God, is if I did the right behaviors, then why did this happen to me? And when I was doing a lot of the emotional work, I had a 6-year-old client, and she was coming to me. She was at a fundamental church, and she was like, I am scared of the devil. I'm scared I'm going to go to hell. She's only 6 years old. And she said, I don't want to be separated from my family. And I said, well, who do you think God is? What is, how do you see God? And she eagerly told me, I'm going to read this out of the book, God is a blue spirit with colors and balloons in all different colors, no head, and can talk. And I thought, that
Oh,
is the best definition of God that I have ever heard. And I hope that she will never have any filters that keep her from remembering that, because that opened up that bright white light. What I saw on the other side were all these different colors that don't fit. They're more colors than the ones that are in the 64 Crayola color box or whatever it is now. I don't have kids, so I don't know what it's grown, the size is grown to, but
it's pretty
there are
big.
more colors. There are more colors that come in that, with the little built-in sharpener. I think that was the favorite. That was the favorite school supply that I wanted. But anyway, the white absorbs it all. So when you're crossing over to the other dimension and you see this white light, you're wrapped in this white light, you're like this cocoon. That is God in my
Opinion.
experience, and it's an energy, because there's nowhere that God is not. There, God has no beginning, God has no end. Um, and I will tell you that God, I felt just, I was enveloped in God. God was in me. God was me. I was God. God was presence and fullness and oneness. But most of all, God was love, and pure, non judgmental love. And in that state, it was not that I suddenly had been forgiven for my mistakes, it's that they no longer existed.
Right.
Nothing I had done on earth was being weighed or measured. It was simply that way my story had played out. And I had been searching externally for God and didn't realize that it was in me the whole time.
Well, and I've heard that before. I think that, I grew up Catholic. I am not a practicing Catholic any longer,
You
but I
and my
grew up
husband both
re-
recovering.
recovering. I'll have to use that. I'm a
That's
recovering.
actually the second highest denomination, recovering Catholics. Catholics are first, then recovering
Recovering
Catholics, and
Catholics the
then,
second.
yeah.
Stand up and say, "My name is Michael. I'm a recovering Catholic."
Yeah, you guys got loaded with guilt and shame.
Oh yeah, I mean it's amazing. I mean and it's a whole different conversation. But when my parents got divorced, my mother was a devout. You go to church, you go to church, you go to church, you go to church. Everything was about church. I'm sure similar to your parents, it was same thing. My mother is from West Virginia, and it same thing back there. It's kind of a same thing as the South. It is church, 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 church. So anyway, we get down there and we go to church, and because my parents had divorced, all of a sudden my mother couldn't take communion, and then us kids couldn't take communion, and it was like, okay, why are you punishing? Number one, why are you punishing the kids? Because we had nothing to do with this, kind of a thing. So
Yeah,
it changed my perspective on it, and if she I mean, she's deceased now. She's up in heaven, or I'm sure she's up in heaven. Um, the, I don't mean that negatively. it's,
no, no, you
it
can call
is,
it heaven. It's a wonderful place. It's an
it,
absolutely brilliant, wonderful place.
well, yeah. And the thing of it is that, she went from church to church. She went to Nazarene. She went to Baptist, Southern Baptist. You name it, she went to it, trying to fit in, trying to get somebody to accept her.
Yeah.
Catholic Church didn't. And it kind of closed the door for me on the
Yes.
Catholic Church, because I felt that you should be there for somebody, not exclude them, and you should be there. And the kids had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
It's not like the kids said, "Hey, mom, dad, get a divorce." We were kids, and so yeah, my outlook on that. But at the same time, they also you grow up in that environment where I mean, I grew up when the nuns would smack your hands for when you're in Sunday school, and you get smacked with a ruler, which you can't get away with these days. But they literally would smack your hand if you did something or said something wrong. You weren't sitting up straight or whatever the case may be. And they made you fear God.
Yes.
I better do
Yes.
this or God's going to hate me. I better do this or God's this. And I have I've been on a similar journey to yours in certain aspects that, you don't need to fear God, and you don't need, God's not a vengeful God. God
No.
doesn't put you in front of him and go, well, here's all the things you did wrong. So, now's the time to pay up.
None of that existed there. That's why I said what I said. The mistakes, there's like, no. Um,
Yeah.
that's
See, that's
all
a good
man
thing.
made. It's all man made fear to keep you in control. And it's not, we're starting to come to the recognition that those beliefs that we were given were misinterpreted, misguided,
Yeah.
and I'm going to just say false, were lies,
I agree.
and creating this concept of a God that actually takes on a person, and that somehow you're going to be judged, because
Yeah.
that is one of the 10 common lessons that I talk about in the book from near death experiences is you are not judged. And even Jesus said, judge not lest you be judged. But I mean, I struggle to find a church that's not hypocritical,
Well, yeah, there's something you said earlier kind of really, it hit a note with me because you had said that about different Bibles, you know, and this is not a religious talk, obviously, in no way, if you go to church and you believe in the church, perfectly up to you. That does not bother me whatsoever. But the stuff that I studied and the theology that I studied later when I went to university, I delved into a little bit of that, was the fact that man wrote the Bible 50 years after Jesus even died. And that's from story to story to story to story. And then King James decided, well, we're going to make my version of the Bible. And the Pope said, we're going to make my version of the Bible. And you have different versions of the Bible
yeah,
in different religions and different versions of the Bible within those religions. So
yeah,
I'm glad that you clarified that because I think that, we are all part of the universe collectively and we're all
absolutely.
connected collectively, in my opinion. And I'm getting that from our conversation that, that kind of is correct, right?
Yes, and that is everyone and everything is connected. We are energy, and our energy is connected. When you lose this
Shell.
physical vessel that is walking around, it's like God walking around in human form, or in this, when we die and this decays, or we preserve it, however we're going to choose to do that. But what comes out is the soul. And if you think about it, that is the vapor. It's your breath. It's what keeps you alive. When you
Mhm.
put your hand on a cold day, you can see that is, it like evaporates. Okay. It's um, Casper the Ghost kind of energy. It doesn't have a
Yeah.
defined shape, but it's all connected, and your soul lives on forever. It has this really long trajectory. This is not our first rodeo, Michael. And I hope your audience can get that. We're not going to get everything done in one lifetime. We came here to learn a lesson, and
Mhm.
I was on the wrong path. I was on the path to being someone who's going to be killing people, and I was doing it for the wrong reasons. And it was keeping me from being me. I was trying to
Right.
be who my father wanted me to be instead of being the being that God created me to be. And I'm just now coming into her in my 50s, late 50s here, but it's exciting and it's
Yeah.
freeing, and I know it because I can trust my intuition on it. And for so long, I was told, you're making this up because it was a memory. And how do you know about a
Right.
memory? And women with sexual abuse, and men too, that they have struggled because it's a memory, and there's no
Yep.
evidence for it. But I want to say to people, trust your gut. And then when you get clear and you believe it and you love yourself unconditionally, you will start going, oh, that makes so much sense. Now I know why I
Yeah.
didn't get married till I was 40. I couldn't date a guy without pleasing them. And I was living with this fear. Here we get back to the fear
Right.
that if I displeased them, they could kill me, which is what happened, and then you put a really controlling dad who you never got angry, you would get punished, that all
Yeah.
just melds together, and it's just like, oh no, I'm not going to marry this person. I don't want to put myself in at such risk again. So you keep yourself safe, and you keep yourself small, and you keep your situations around you controlled as best you can. And that's not living life. And
It
that's
is
what I
not.
want people to know. That is not living life. And loving ourselves, truly doing that, not putting other people ahead of yourself, but loving you, not shooting yourself. Because when you should, I should have done this, I should have done that. What you're doing is you're just shaming you. And shame is one of the lowest vibrations, and it brings you way down. So if you're using that on your children, or your husband uses it on anybody, uses it on you, you use it on yourself, cut that one straight off at the head. No more shouldn't.
I agree. I agree 100%. I think that we're starting to recognize intergenerational trauma,
Yes.
where things have been passed down through the family, and then it reflects upon us as children, and then unfortunately sometimes we pass that on to our children, whether it be one extreme or the other. As I said earlier, both my parents were alcoholics. My father died at 39 years old from alcohol, and I
Mm,
really don't touch
so
alcohol.
young.
Okay, so and that's why I became a DUI cop. That's why I became a cop, actually. Um, but I have other family members that went the other direction,
Yeah.
and they kind of go, "Well, Dad did it, so it was okay if I do it," kind of a situation. And then you start realizing that you look back and you see, well, my mother was an alcoholic. Then I found out my grandfather, her dad, was an alcoholic, and then I found out the father before that, her grandfather, my great grand. I always try to catch up with that. Sometimes I don't always get it right.
Yeah.
Basically, her grandfather, my great grandfather, was an alcoholic. So my mother felt that she had to be an alcoholic, kind of a
Yeah.
thing. And it just, intergenerational trauma, I think, has a negative effect on our lives. And if once we recognize it, whole nother
I,
conversation, but we recognize it, it
yeah.
helps us to move forward.
And that's why I do talk about trauma, because my parents never healed their trauma wounds. My mother was born in Kiev. Look at what's going on at Kiev
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
now, and the Ukraine. And now here she is, 84. She's reliving the trauma when
All
she
over
sees it
again.
on TV, because she was a very young girl then.
That's a
They
shame.
got out, but her home was lost. Her, die Mutterland, and so it is imperative that we in our generation heal our trauma wounds
Yeah.
so that we can move on and not pass them forward. And that is where we are kind of as a world, is we're at this point of something's going to give here.
Yeah.
Okay. And we are bridgers from the old to the new. We need a new way of a new system in place of living where everyone is respected.
Yeah.
They're all sentient beings. Okay, so our
Yep.
little doggies, all the wildlife in Africa, all sentient beings are respected, and our Mother Earth, we treat her with kindness and the respect that she deserves, instead of pouring pollutants down, streams, and littering her and all that kind of stuff. Don't even get started on that whole
That's
thing.
that's a
But
whole nother
you know,
2 hour conversation.
yeah, yeah. But I want people also to know you're never alone. Okay. Even though the pandemic, a lot of people, quote, physically died alone. Um, I understand, and I want people to understand this too, that I'm not negating that your human part with the emotions. You're going
Yeah.
to have grief. You're going to have sadness. You're going to have all of that that comes with the loss of a loved one. But I'm trying to get people to expand this in a bigger cosmic context,
Mm.
and the benevolence of life, and where we need to go in creating a new culture that doesn't see death as doom and gloom. Most of the books that are written about death are all very depressing,
Right.
and that is not the truth about death. Now, dying leading up to it may be painful, but the moment of death, your deceased loved ones, the angels, everyone is around you. You go to the other side. You're not alone. And I want people to realize that. And that's all part of this huge, massive collection of indie ears that all pretty much have the same stories, coming back. And I just put it all together in my book. So, my NDE is a part of the book, but it's
Mhm.
also the trauma I went through, how you have to get through trauma, and this work that I call spiritual transformational experience. I'm telling you, it's not easy. It is not easy to let go of belief systems that have been handed down for every generation. But in your gut, this doesn't align with me anymore.
Right.
Church, you don't go, your mother expects you to be at church, you go to please her, but you're sitting there and your mind's thinking about what am I going to have for lunch or what I'm going to, you're just going through the motions. It's time to quit going through the motions and it's time to start actually processing, dealing with it, and changing your behavior because you can't do anything unless you're aware of it.
I agree with that. That's profound. Um, I've got to ask this question because I know that I've read and seen other NDEs that have talked about going to hell and what they felt was hell. Do you believe in hell?
I don't believe in hell as a place that's in the middle of the earth that's on fire. That was described to me as the Baptist church are going to go to hell, this
Mhm.
destination. Because all I could think about, and kids take things literally, is that how do you take a shower when you're on fire all the time? And are you going to be eating barbecue all the time? I mean, I couldn't translate that, but
Right.
I think people experience hell on earth. And I think there is. For people that are evil people and that are really dangerous, and you saw it with the way other people treat other people with domestic violence and stuff like that as a cop, all your years. I think there's the earth, and then there's this realm around it called psychic pollution. And when we die, our souls, it's like a balloon, like a heart-shaped balloon. It just
Right.
got cut, it goes straight up. Okay, that happens for probably 99% of the people, but some people, they get stuck in this wobble of this psychic pollution, and it's going to take them a little bit longer for their soul to get to where it needs to be. So that's when people say they've gone to hell. I think it's coming from either a past life that they're having and recalling, or it is coming from a place in them that has not been able to heal something present day that they're
From
still
that.
stuck on, and the experience is trying to get them to unhook it, because the soul is not about evilness and uh, the hell or anything like that. The soul is nothing but light, love, beauty, goodness, and that's what we're all born with.
Well, and I asked that question for a couple of reasons. One is to kind of see what kind of a validation that you may have had, and two, the innate need for justice in in my soul, basically. When you look at individuals, well, like we can use Hitler as an example, killing 6 million Jews. You know, it's hard to fathom that these individuals would be taken up and encompassed in love. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
you really kind of stop thinking, well, after all of that and what they did, all of that in dividing families, taking families away, killing people, gassing people, how can that take place? So you would hope that there was some kind of, um, I won't say necessarily retribution, but consequences for your actions here on earth.
Yeah, well, I think for those people, they have totally disconnected from who they are as a spiritual being. They have no connection to their soul. Okay. They have had fractured souls, and they never have gotten their soul back to even have that come in to experience who they truly are. And so they identify with the human, physical, three-dimensional world. And that's what they live in. They don't seek
Mm.
for they're unable to seek for higher self actualization, um, a, an understanding of um, soul and spirit and what the world is really about. it's a complete disconnect, and there's a lot of people that can't connect with it for whatever
Whatever
reason,
reason.
and they're going to have to come back again and do it differently, and because I've seen that a lot. People just can't get it, and they don't understand it. They don't want it.
Right.
They want to just be able to do what they want to do to whomever they want to do and not have to pay a price.
Which is unfortunate this day and age. It just is.
Yeah, and we're in a very divisive time in terms of that, and it's like, what is the truth? I'm speaking to you my truth from my experience. I'm not making this up,
Right.
and I have, because I worked at CDC. I have a very science oriented mind, so I am going to the International Association of Near Death Studies, and I'm looking at what other people are
Right.
saying, because this is not something that's you can do a study on. It's not like, okay, I can study that you had this, and every person's NDE experience is different, but these are the commonalities that you can take
Right.
away from it.
It's like every journey. I mean, you've
Yeah.
been through your journey and your accident and your journey and your surgeries and everything. We share a commonality in that because I've gone through 8 surgeries. I understand it from that perspective, but each of our journeys are unique to each other.
Yeah.
There are things in your journey that I didn't experience, and I'm sure there are things in my journey that you hadn't experienced. But we still share the commonality of
Yes.
having to go through each one of those and understand what happens when you go through those traumatic things. So yeah, it's we're all connected. We're all connected.
Yeah. And I think the last thing is just learning to love you unconditionally, because so many of us grew up with conditional love, and that is so hard. But to be gentle with yourself, and just draw a little heart over your heart and just breathe in how much love you have for yourself, that you're here today. And it really is a gift, because we never know, we do not know when um, death is going to arrive. We just don't. I didn't think it was going to happen at 19. I can tell you that.
Life can change in an instant. Speaking of connecting, how does somebody connect with you?
Oh, I would love for you to connect with me. Go to my website. It is www.nicolekerr.com, and it's NICOLEKERR.com. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. It's under Nicole.Angelique, ANGELIQUE .Kerr. I'm also on Goodreads, and you can buy my book. It's a paperback right now at Barnes and Noble, and Amazon have it discounted to $9.99. And I guarantee you that book and a cup of coffee or a frappuccino or whatever you want, it will definitely make an impression if you are, or make you think, is what I should say. And that's what I want people to do. There's a checklist at the end of the book about fears you may have about death. Okay, so you can check those off. If you're in a book club, there's book club discussion. And I think it would be a fascinating discussion to have at a book club about different people's concepts and fears related to death. It will definitely get you knowing each other on a more intimate level. And if I'm on the same time, if I can work my schedule, I will pop into your Zoom book discussion, say hi, and answer any questions that you have
As a bonus.
as a bonus.
As a
They're for
bonus. It's a
free.
bonus.
Yep.
Well, I'll make sure that everything's in the links are in the show notes and everything, so everybody knows how to get a hold of you and make it easy for them to be able to connect with you. So it'll be in your
I would
bio and
appreciate that. Thank you, Michael.
your bio, and then the social media will have all the links below your bio on the website. So I appreciate that. I'll make sure everybody can get in touch with you. Um, and you may have already just said this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. This is one more thing before you go. Should you have any words of wisdom? But I think you just covered it, but maybe you can surprise me.
Um, I'm just going to say, please love yourself. You have to start there. Don't expect and be dependent on other people loving you, because that is going to involve conditions, except from your little doggy, maybe. But please be gentle with yourself. Please don't talk negatively to yourself, love you no matter what you're going through, and also start diving in to false belief systems that are no longer serving you and actually sabotaging you from what you actually want in life and who you are in life.
Profound words of wisdom. Thank you very much for sharing those.
Of course.
Nicole, I feel like I'm talking to my daughter. I mean, we're about the same age, but I'm still feeling like talking to my daughter because my daughter, I told you, named Nicole. So
Yeah.
now Nicole, every time I say Nicole, I'm thinking, oh, but that's a good thing, see? Thank you very much for sharing your journey. Thank you very much for sharing your words of wisdom and your experience with us. I really appreciate it. I hope that we've inspired people and we've motivated them. And I do believe that we've educated them in such a manner that they can have a better understanding of death and not to fear it and what may be on the other side for them if it does happen. So,
well, it will happen.
It will. Yeah. I won't say if. We'll just say
you're not going to get out of it. Sorry.
We'll
Sorry,
say
everybody.
when. But thank you very much for taking this journey with me today. I really appreciate it. And
I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. And I look forward to connecting with more of your audience. And happy holidays. It makes a great gift as well. And especially if someone is dealing with some loved one and they're scared about death, they're trepid about what that's going to look like. I hope that they will find my book inspiring.
That would be fantastic. I think it's an opportunity for people to learn. Again, thank you very much. I hope that we can have a conversation in the future.
Sounds good. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.